There are so many things to unpack here.
Yeah, that's let's just talk about the
Let's talk about the
fashion
Barbie.
component.
Since the Barbie, let's like, because it's a good segue. Um, yes, there was Barbie in Ukraine. She was the most coveted thing right at the time when I was kind of turning too old to covet toys. So we didn't have anything like that. We didn't have shiny American anything until the fall of the Soviet Union, which is 91. And I really wanted one. So my mom, when she saw these paintings that I was making with the Barbie, she's like, oh no, is it because you didn't get a Barbie? I'm like, yeah, I wish. I wish it were that simple. I wish, Mom, I was just upset that I didn't get a Barbie. So think about, to me, she's not just a representation of fake, phony, beautifully marketed, but ultimately toxic Western stuff as it applies to Westerners. She's definitely a thing that burst onto the scene for these completely deprived of luxury people that we were in the early 90s in the Soviet Union. And she was everything that we never had. She was glamorous. And as a young girl, as like a preteen, young teen, there was no filter. Y'all have grown up with a lot of advertising from your, or unless you, there's someone here who might have avoided some of that barrage by making lifestyle choices, you know who you are, to not be exposed to television and to live in a much more secluded lifestyle away from the mass produced and mass media. But majority of the folks here, I assume, were, I think generally majority is not. So you have calluses, you're not a newborn baby with a super sensitive skin. You have built up a filter of knowing that if it's coming from TV, it's most likely trying to make you buy something, trying to make you crave something. We had none. We never saw any colors that bright. We were just tiny children in terms of the level of naivete toward advertising and toward consumerism was astounding. So not only and having an image like this come in as an idealized female, where we already had these extremely ridiculous ideas about women, because in Soviet Union women had supposedly equality, right? We had as many doctors and lawyers in women and men. However, how many directors of the hospital do we have as women? Zero. How many judges do we have as women? Very few. But doctors and lawyers, on the ground, no problem. And you were expected to be glamorous, beautiful, high heels, skirts, dresses. All the Westerners who came to the former Soviet Union countries in the 90s were just like, oh my God, the women here are so beautiful. The women there were so beautiful for these Western men is because they looked like Stepford wives to them. They looked like the idea of this prescriptive femininity, that, the bemoaning of the 50s, the things that the sexual revolution and like more of women liberation movement has swept away to a degree, but everybody was conforming to this like hyper feminine ideal. And it was just such a sight for sore American misogynistic eyes coming into this strange country. So, yeah, did I just kind of go off on a really big tangent?
Thank you for answering. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I can touch just briefly on, in terms of images, my source imagery is crucially important to my practice. I maybe should have kind of started there. I owe everything that I am as a painter to street photography and to the internet, the casual snapshots, the crazy yearbook, and the crazy Russian version of Facebook type of Tumblr, and everything else in between. I don't ever use magnum photography, like high quality, lauded, recognized, because it's already art, it's already perfect, it's already finished. I have nothing to say about it. What I want is the discard pile, the B-sides, the family album, pictures taken by a drunk uncle with the light leaks. Those are, because again, I'm interested not in that highly celebrated, official, polished history, but the history of the everyday. And a lot of the pictures that I use, I started off feeling that I had no right to use anybody else's photography but my own. So for the first few years, I used to think myself a street photographer, and I used to go to Ukraine and shoot from the hip, literally, because people are still extremely suspicious of strangers taking pictures of them on the street, even if it's a tiny little girl. You know, at the time I'm in my early 20s, look like a child, but still there's such a fear of surveillance culture from the former Soviet. People are so traumatized, and they're also hyper vigilant. So people have eyes on their backs of their heads. You look at them across the square and they will know. God forbid you point your lens at them. So that image that I showed first, she is my mother Russia, mother Ukraine. She's the one who started all of it. I was at the train station in my home city, Kharkov, large city on the eastern side of Ukraine. And this is 2004 or 2003. And again, I know while she's not super glamorous and not wearing heels, but there's a bucket, there's a dolly, there's stuff that she's hauling, and she's still wearing a dress and her hair is done up and she's wearing makeup. Because you don't leave the house, even though it's knee-deep dirt and you did physical labor, but you still have to portray this image of femininity. Otherwise, it's just taboo otherwise. You have to. There's no option. I didn't leave my house without doing my makeup when I was 18 and perfectly beautiful, just fine. But the idea of not having a presentation that is appropriate for femininity was just, it was not an option. And again, this goes back to the entire kind of premise behind my work. It's this exploring of experiences of people and collective experiences of peoples who had such limited options. I appreciate the comment about the variety of mark, and I'm gonna use that word, the juxtaposition word that we don't want to use. All my work is based on trauma. Personal trauma and transgenerational trauma that I feel I carry. So it's impossible for me not to carry, it just is. And I'm not interested in depicting things that are heavy and dark using dark palettes, because I think that's too fast and too easy. I think we expect something, again, we're very conditioned by mass media, by the cinema. Ooh, it's dark and spooky, something bad is happening. But a lot of really bad things, a lot of terrifying things don't happen in environments that cue us in. And when I say environments, I don't even mean visual environments, but they can happen within our families. They can happen within places and perpetuated by people who are also the people who nurture and caretake. So I hope that creating that tension between the violence of Mark, the ambiguity and maybe hopefully ambiguity of the subject matter, while placing my figures in these brightly lit, cheery, sunny, noonday light, because nothing bad happens in the sunlight, right? Wrong. I always think about, I think where for me this comes from is, I was 6 years old when Chernobyl blew up. You guys got news about it before we did. It took about 3 days for our mass media, because it was state media, to start speaking about it, because they were still hoping to sweep it under a rug and pretend it didn't happen. And it was April, and April in my home city, which is only 300 miles away from Chernobyl, is a gorgeous, beautiful, that perfect fresh green leaves and bright blue skies and the sunlight and all this waking up after the winter. Yet this thing happened that was so violent and so terrifying, and it was invisible. So I think that there's this forever bright noon light of early spring, mid-spring, later spring, and the sense of menace, the invisible menace, and the menace that is so colliding with the visual cues that make you think that it would be a cheery picnic. But at the same time, one of the worst nuclear disasters ever just happened in your backyard. And how everyday life just continues, but how you also cope with the trauma in the moment, at the time, and how it lingers. And I do hope that there is a universality that can come across in the work, because I just choose to use images and references from my culture and from my history, because that's what I know best and that's what speaks most to me. and I feel like I have the right to the content. But I do hope that there is a universality of human experience that is not constrained by culture. I started art school by thinking that I was going to be an abstract painter. I was obsessed with abstract expressionism. All I wanted to do is paint like John Mitchell and de Kooning. And once I got into school, I realized that what I wanted to paint were people, but I think that desire for expressive brushwork and larger scale has never faded, and I feel like in this series it's finally starting to kind of come together. It took me only 10 years, but it's okay, right? But I think, again, because it's a funny thing trying to marry on the same surface influences that I have from socialist realism, really, because all the propaganda, everything, like there was only one approved style of art, and it was everywhere, and it was socialist realism. And I know how much you guys are familiar with it, but it's always these larger than life towering figures. They're always very healthy, very kind of like chiseled features, large hands, very potent, powerful bodies. There's kind of echoing to the classics, you know, Roman and Grecian sculpture in terms of like celebration of the really robust body. But it's also a very direct kind of Norman Rockwell idealized level of depiction of not just figures but also of everyday life. I definitely think about subverting that trope or playing with that trope and using figures, placing these figures that are not at all like those idealized farmers and, I don't know, welders or like airplane pilots, which, again, most of those figures were men anyway, the ones who were presented as very potent and very robust and strong, but using a similar pictorial language then to represent people who I feel got very little representation during the time. Yes. It's a strange talk. About this entire talk is about displacement, right? I am sitting in my studio while the work is in the gallery an hour away. It's a funny situation. But maybe I can use something that didn't make it into the show because there was not enough wall space. Interestingly enough, it's 100. I thought that 100 linear feet of gallery space was going to be hard to fill, and I had to take half of stuff back because obviously I don't remember anymore how to hang a gallery show because it's been COVID for 2 years and it's been a while since I hung one. So these guys went through. Can we see it okay? Yes, we can see it okay. This painting went through quite a few iterations, and they started, so the usual process for me is I take the figures out of their native environment, always. It's very rare that I use the starting reference, the figure and the environment together to play with. And even if I do, I never copy the photograph. It's more of a starting point. It's more like a post-it note to myself. While I'm not interested in hyper-realistic depiction, I'm interested in veritable light. I'm interested in light that hits objects in a way that is believable and creates an illusion. So I'm still very interested in that Western European classical painting trope of making things look real-ish. But I want the combination of both. I want you to be simultaneously aware of the fact that it's paint on the surface, but I also want it to read as believable enough figure in a believable enough space being hit by the light in a way that makes sense to you as a person who lives in a world where light hits objects. The vastness of a landscape, the openness of a field, the limitless field of possibility is something that I like as an environment to displace my figures into from this limited environment that they're coming from, right? From their post-Soviet spaces.
Tatyana, I've been watching you as an artist for a number of years, and your work has gotten bigger, not only in size and scope, but in depth. And I wanted to say that in the first place. But I also wondered whether after this particular show of really what feels like a culmination, whether you have any itching of any other kind that makes you think that you might try a different kind of project.
Thank you, Andrea. I love this question coming from you because you have been there seeing my work progress for many years now. And I really appreciate all the kind support that I have received from you over the years. I want to make him bigger. I'm more bigger, and I think I am interested in the multi-figure compositions, which most of these are solitary. There is something about there is a Russian saying that I will loosely on the spot translate. I don't know if I'm doing a very good job, even though I'm a linguist, but you're not a warrior when you're in a field by yourself. So basically, like the solitary, you always need a group. And I think that kind of was on repeat in my head, but not to get overly, maudlin, but majority of our experiences can be very solitary or can feel very isolated, especially for people who are displaced, for people who are living in different cultures. But the field is still there, and it's still an open field, and you still have to, wage that war against yourself in it. But I have a huge canvas on I don't think I can turn my camera around to show it well right now, but there's an 11-foot canvas on my wall right now. I'm really excited about it. And what I'm looking forward to is not just, I want more complexity. I want more complexity of the pictorial space that doesn't make linear sense. I want to disrupt the picture plane. And I want to liberate the mark even more so, because I feel like, because of my recent venturing into mural work, I feel like I got a little too tight and realistic in my depiction, and especially with the figures, because I'm making a lot of commercial work and people want people who look like people rather than, melting faces and smears. And I feel like maybe there's just a little bit of that residual tendency of making people look like people, and I really want to move closer to the expressive mark and allowing the medium of paint, which you can control, but you can choose not to. I want to make more choices for the paint to lead, instead of me moving the paint in this, I don't want to get it any more about my fine muscle control and the fact that I can make a face look like a face. I want it to be more about the expressive quality of the medium. So more people, messier people, and the picture plane that doesn't make any sense. That's what I'm doing. Thank you. This is a wonderful question. I really appreciate it. So I really, really appreciate everybody being here and giving me your kind attention. I'm always available. I do a lot of virtual studio visits, and I've done quite a few interviews virtually like this. So if you ever want to talk about stuff or see more of new work, I am just an email away. I'm very accessible, and I would love to hear from you.